Breaking news out of New York right now. Luigi Mangione's plane from Pennsylvania has just landed after he waived extradition in a Pennsylvania courtroom earlier today. He's expected to deplane any moment now. You see dozens of NYPD officers there taking Luigi Mangione, who is in handcuffs, by the way, into custody there in New York. Later on today, he's expected to be in a New York City courtroom to face charges there. And we just learned that he's actually facing 4 new federal charges, including the criminal charges of first-degree murder with a terrorism charge added to that. Of course, we were standing by waiting for Luigi Mangione to deplane. He just landed moments ago from Pennsylvania, where his lawyers waived extradition. So he is in New York now, where he will face charges for, again, murder, first-degree murder with a terrorism charge, amongst other weighted charges there. And I see him there with that orange jumpsuit. There he is, Luigi Mangione, deplaning now, the suspect in the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. He's being led away, flanked by, looks like half a dozen different officers there. He's headed to an SUV where he will then head to another courthouse in New York, and he will sit in a jail cell as we learn more about when his court date is, other charges that he could face. Oh, excuse me, he looks like he's actually could be heading into a helicopter there, some sort of police helicopter, where he will be taken into, presumably, New York City, to a helipad there in the city, where he will be in a courtroom facing a judge potentially later on today. And we should learn more about his charges, what he's facing, criminal charges, and again now, as we just mentioned, 4 new federal charges. If you're just joining us, that is Luigi Mangione, the suspect in the killing of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. He was arrested, found in Pennsylvania last week, and there he is in that orange jumpsuit boarding a helicopter. He just deplaned from a plane that was in Pennsylvania earlier today, where his lawyers waived extradition to New York. This is in New York, and he is now getting on board that helicopter where he will go to New York City, where he will face a judge today. All right, we're going to stay on top of this. Let's go now to CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez outside the courthouse in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. Nicole, thank you for joining us. Can you go over what happened inside the courtroom and Luigi Mangione's demeanor during all of this?
Hi, Liz. Yeah, Luigi Mangione today, a lot calmer than what we saw his first time he made an appearance here at the Blair County Courthouse. He actually seemed almost comfortable. We saw him exchanging smiles and laughs with his attorney throughout the 2 hearings we watched unfold today, swaying in his chair, really unfazed by the amount of people that were in the gallery behind him. And let me tell you, it was a zoo in there. So many people, standing room only at one point. Not only, of course, media from across the country, but even spectators who traveled across state lines to be here and see Mangione in court and in person. Now, sitting right behind Mangione was a line of about 15 NYPD officers, likely they are ready to transport him to that state as soon as that extradition hearing wrapped up. So what we saw happen today was a couple of things. They discussed some of the court proceedings in terms of those Pennsylvania charges, which we know are the weapons and forgery charges. But then we had a big gap between the hearings where we expected to hear whether or not he planned to fight his extradition back to New York. About a half hour or so where we saw both his defense attorney and the prosecution for the Commonwealth go back and enter the judge's chambers. It looks as if they had quite the discussion there and maybe discussed some kind of agreement. When they emerged and came back into the courtroom, we saw Mangione's defense attorney, Thomas Dickey, there have a very animated conversation with him, likely about what they discussed. Court clerks brought that waiver, and it was basically said and done. The judge ordered that he would then be remanded to NYPD's custody, and he is on his way there right now, Liz.
Right away, he was put into an SUV and then later a small plane to go to New York. So what comes next for Mangione later on today?
Well, it looks like he could be heading straight to another courtroom, whether that is criminal court for the state charges he's facing, those murder charges. Again, not only first-degree murder, but other murder charges attached to that word, terrorism. There is also the chance he could be heading to a federal court if those charges that we do expect to be revealed later today are done so before he arrives in the state.
Yeah, there are 4 new federal charges against Luigi Mangione. Can you walk us through why lawyers decided to do that?
Well, we're still waiting, I think, for a lot of information on the motivation behind escalating it to a federal charge, right? I think once we see those charges drop, we will have a lot more understanding of really the expected goal of that. Right now, we do know that the Manhattan District Attorney has been very vocal about wanting to get Mangione back in the state to face those very serious charges. But it looks as if the FBI is hoping to possibly send an even stronger message with federal charges on top of that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see if the impact of this, the overwhelming support that Mangione has received from people online and social media, people actually giving him money to support his legal causes there. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Welcome in, everybody. I'm Reed Cowan. All right, so breaking news. Video to our monitors show accused killer Luigi Mangione arriving moments ago in an orange jumpsuit. The state now hosting him is the state where prosecutors say he gunned down the UnitedHealthcare CEO. Mangione now faces federal charges, including murder, stalking, and weapons charges. Those are, of course, on top of the 11 state charges in New York. So you see him there getting loaded onto a police helicopter. You just might see Mangione in Manhattan in front of a judge as early as later today. So let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi. Welcome in, Caroline. So I want to talk about those new federal charges. What's the decision-making process here for the feds?
Yeah, quite a dramatic change of events from earlier today. We saw Mangione waive extradition. And just as early as this morning, we believed that he would remain in NYPD custody and appear before a Manhattan state court, a state judge, to hear those charges of first-degree murder, second-degree murder that recently he was indicted for here in Manhattan under Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and that he would serve his time in Rikers Island for the state charges. However, just recently, within hours, the feds, the DOJ, specifically the Southern District of New York, has come out with a criminal complaint charging Mangione with 4 counts, 1 murder, obviously, and they're taking over from here on out. The FBI has swooped in. He's going to be arraigned first on the federal charges. And so, we're seeing sort of a battle of jurisdictions play out in the system. The federal system always goes first, and the state courts will take a back seat now to these federal charges.
Man, you see that video of him arriving there into New York, chains about his feet, chains around his waist and his wrists, and you really hearken back to New York police saying, we'll get him. They got him. So how soon can we expect to see Mangione in front of that New York judge?
Very quickly. It could be this evening. It could be tomorrow morning. Back when we thought he was going to be arraigned on the state charges, I suspected it would be later this evening. However, because they are the federal charges, it may be tomorrow morning. However, that will begin the official start of these proceedings. It will sort of start the clock on a trial time. He could begin potential plea negotiations. I would note, Reed, that in the federal system, contrary to what a lot of people believe, we have the federal death penalty. In New York, the death penalty was not on the table in terms of punishment. The highest punishment for that first-degree murder charge was 25 years to life without the possibility of parole. So it's on the table on the federal charges should the DOJ seek that punishment.
Wow. Okay. And we do have some video right now of Luigi Mangione taking off in that helicopter. This is the helicopter that he was loaded into on his way to Manhattan, where he will get a new bed tonight. So let's drill down. I want to ask you a little bit more about those federal charges. They do carry the potentiality of the death penalty. You mentioned federal charges first. Explain that for us.
Yeah, so essentially, they're separate sovereigns here. The act was committed in New York State, obviously in Manhattan. And, by all accounts, from the beginning of this crime having been committed, we've really heard exclusively from the Manhattan DA's office, from Alvin Bragg, whispers about when that indictment was going to come down. He was arrested on a complaint, but just this week, a grand jury indicted him. And so the introduction of the feds is really interesting here. It doesn't happen too often where there are concurrent prosecutions at both a state and federal level, but you do see it happening if the DOJ feels that it is in the pursuit of justice. You'll recall Derek Chauvin was prosecuted both federally and at a state level. So given these aggravating circumstances here, it seems pretty clear that the DOJ wants to take a stand, make a really clear statement here. Mangione's defense attorney, Karen Agnifilo, has said that this is just piling on, that there are in fact double jeopardy issues potentially raised by both the federal charges and the state charges for the same conduct. I don't think that's true because they're sort of coming at it from different angles. You get the federal hook here. The theory goes because they use sort of interstate commerce. And so both have jurisdiction. And in our system, the federal system sort of takes precedence here.
Well, and thinking about his defense attorney really trying to shoot holes in that, it is often said in court settings that when there is evidence that is seen by both the defense and prosecution as overwhelming, they start to hit process and procedure. We might be seeing that play out as well, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Challenging the evidence, trying to preclude evidence from being admitted in front of the jurors, potentially also raising some sort of insanity or impairment defense. It seems pretty obvious they're not going to go with the defense that it wasn't him. There's just, regardless of how much evidence you fight to keep out, there seems to be a mountain of evidence here. There could be, obviously in any case of this magnitude with this type of evidence, you have to be, as a defense attorney, you have to be thinking about a plea deal, potential, at this point, a global settlement between the federal government as well as state prosecutors for something just to take the death penalty off the table. That's probably, one of the best things you could go for at this point. So those are probably the things that Mangione's defense are taking into account now.
Back to New York, we have been promising you that we've been watching that helicopter bringing Luigi Mangione into New York, and there we have it right there. You see long guns flanking him on the left and the right, even behind him and in front of him. Luigi Mangione, having waived extradition, got a plane ride and then a helicopter ride out of Pennsylvania and now into the state of New York. Luigi Mangione wearing that orange jail-issued jumpsuit that he will have to get used to in the weeks and months ahead. Indications are that he will plead not guilty and continue that with new representation. But you see right there, he is wearing chains about his feet, chains about his waist, and those chains are also attached to his wrists as he goes in to begin the next chapter in his journey to justice. Fascinating conversation happening here. He is charged with those New York charges, but as he takes that slow walk there, we also know that he is now facing federal charges. He has likely been told and briefed by his new representation, his attorney, that those federal charges up the game for his future, put more pressure on his attorneys to be very, very sharp-tongued in their defense because those federal charges carry the potentiality of the death penalty. You see Luigi Mangione taking a moment before he goes into that building, looking out over those exterior vistas, and you can only imagine that the last time he was in New York, he was on the run. He was last seen leaving. Video surveillance would suggest, and prosecutors would make the contention that he was last seen leaving the scene of that murder, headed over towards Central Park where he vanished until police were able to track him down at that Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's. Ask him, have you been in New York recently? And that is when he reportedly started to shake. New York officials said he will be arraigned today. And among those escorting Mangione as soon as he landed in Manhattan is none other than New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who spoke on the case just moments ago.
I wanted to send a very clear and loud message that this act of terrorism and the violence that stems from it is something that will not be tolerated in the city. We wanted to personally be here to show the symbolism of leading from the front. Got mentioned, some of these detectives will finally sleep tonight after this person has been brought to justice here in New York City.
All right, we apologize. Kind of hard to hear what he's saying, but let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levison. Jessica, I want to talk about the new federal murder, stalking, and weapons charges. What's the decision making here for the feds?
Well, the decision making here is, number one, that they have jurisdiction. Reed, as you know, when it comes to federal charges, you need some sort of hook, meaning you need to show that there was either wire fraud, that there was the crossing of interstate lines. And we have that, it looks like, in the Mangione case, where he did, in fact, cross state lines. It looks like part of his crossing of state lines was in the premeditation of committing this crime. When it comes to the stalking charges, I think what we're looking at is the evidence that was apparently uncovered with respect to his notebook, that this was somebody who he allegedly, the United CEO, was targeting, was lying in wait. I think we're going to hear that term more. But when it comes to adding the stalking charge, adding the federal murder charge, which again is only available here because of the crossing of state lines, we're in a situation where you could potentially see federal prosecutors decide to charge the death penalty. Again, I don't know if that is what they ultimately will do, but that, based on the charging documents, is a possibility here.
So how soon can we expect to see Mangione in front of that New York judge?
Quickly. And of course, this is more than just one New York judge. You asked me about the federal charges. The federal charges will be brought parallel with the state charges. So we know that there are also state charges. The state charge includes a terrorism charge, which is not typical for a single killing, but would also allow this particular case to be brought from, for instance, a second-degree murder to a first-degree murder, where obviously the potential penalties are higher. So what you see, which is really interesting, the statement from the prosecutors is that these two cases will be moving in parallel. And I think in both cases, what you see is the addition of charges allowing the main charge, the murder charge, to be taken even more seriously. So all of which is, you asked me, when could we see him in front of a New York judge? There will be a state judge and a federal judge, and this will in part be based on a conversation that the federal prosecutors and the state prosecutors will have about who goes first. But we're talking days here.
All right, Jessica, stay with me because we want to let our viewers hear what we just got from DA Alvin Bragg. Let's listen to that and then talk about it.
We will get to your questions on this important matter, which is obviously why we're here. Some of us were here earlier this week for People versus Luigi Mangione, and wanted to give a brief update on that, as I know we've gotten some questions from some of you. Just for context, as we allege, the defendant in that case brazenly shot Mr. Thompson twice in Midtown Manhattan. It was targeted, premeditated, and meant to sow terror. Accordingly, we charged him here in Manhattan earlier this week with murder in the first degree, among additional charges, which carry the maximum sentence of life without parole. This morning, the defendant waived extradition in Pennsylvania and was picked up and is in the process of being transported by the NYPD here to New York. I'll let the Southern District for New York speak for itself about their plans, but I do want to note that speaking generally, we've had state prosecutions and federal prosecutions proceed as parallel matters, and we're in conversations with our law enforcement counterparts.
All right, so your reaction to what you just heard, Jessica?
Really emphasizing our conversation here. One, which is that the state charges are as serious as they can be, that this includes a first-degree murder charge. He alluded to why he included the terrorism charge. And number two, that he is going to be working hand in glove with the federal prosecutors. Again, those charges, obviously the state and federal charges, all based on the same set of facts, but different charges because different levels of government. And I think what we can expect and what we hear from him is not just cooperation, but potentially what often happens in situations like this is the state government allowing the federal government to take the lead. And that's when we will know more about scheduling, which is it will be based on the federal case. And then we can kind of back into the scheduling orders in the state case.
Luigi Mangione's defense attorney has a long and storied history, no slouch, to borrow the terms of my grandma. She would say, long and storied history, no slouch. So are we getting any sense that his attorneys are going to start shooting holes in the process? Because in the face of overwhelming evidence, Jessica, we know this, they start to hit process and the admission of evidence. Are you starting to see early indications of that strategy for the defense?
Really, really smart question. I think that the defense will be a couple of things. And let's, emphasize something, Reed, that you and I have talked about, which is regardless of the caliber of the attorney, there isn't always a fantastic defense. There is a lot of evidence here. I think there could be a potential defense of not it. I know you found a lot of evidence linking Mangione to the crime, but do you have that, forgive the expression, smoking gun? I think that there will absolutely, as you indicated, be a lot of fighting about which evidence will be included in a potential trial, because, as you said, the evidence not good for Mangione. If his defense attorneys can somehow say there was a problem with the processing of the evidence, if the evidence is not credible, if the evidence is something that for a variety of different reasons the jury cannot believe or cannot rely on, that would obviously be a big win for the defense. And then I think we also need to look at potentially, not probably, but potentially defenses along the lines of his mental state. Now, again, plenty of evidence to indicate that he was able to form the ability to premeditate, but you could see some arguments about whether or not his mental state should be a mitigating factor here.
Well, we do see him in those courtroom sketches in chains, just like we saw him get on that helicopter in chains. This story sure to spark many conversations with us.
We are following breaking news. Luigi Mangione faced a federal judge in New York just a short time ago after waiving extradition in a Pennsylvania court earlier this morning. Anna Schechter is back here with me in Studio 57. She has been following this case for us through it all. Anna is, of course, the senior coordinating producer for our CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit. So, Anna, what unfolded in court today? How did Mangione appear?
Well, he seemed calm. I mean, we saw him in the footage, very calm as he was being escorted. That demeanor played out in court as well. We've got a couple of reporters down there in court who have been sending us these notes. He walked in, nodded to his legal team. Interesting, it's a husband and wife legal team who were there at that bench on his side. No family members appeared to be there, which was interesting to note. So it seemed like just those two attorneys. And then you also had an FBI special agent who worked on the case who was there. So not a packed courtroom today. But it did get really interesting as his defense attorney was saying she'd never seen this in her almost three decades of practice, where you'd have federal charges brought in this way after you had the Manhattan district attorney bring 11 charges, including a first-degree murder charge, which is a terrorism-related charge. I mean, the letter of the law in that count that we read yesterday was that the act was designed to incite terror in the population amongst civilians. And so that's their justification for that. A lot of questions about that. The feds could have decided not to bring these charges and to just let the Manhattan district attorney take this case going for first-degree murder. If he's convicted, that carries potentially life in prison without parole. So that's a very big sentence. The federal murder charge, that could also be life in prison. They might think, well, we feel like we might have a better case and we might secure a guilty conviction. That's more shored up than the district attorney, but a lot of questions.
Well, lots of questions, and one of those questions is about this interplay between the federal and the state. And this was a federal arraignment that he went to first. Does that mean that the federal charges might take precedence and that the federal trial will happen before anything will happen with the state then?
It does indicate that. I mean, yesterday, if we were talking at this exact same time of day, we were just looking at him being extradited to New York on these Manhattan district attorney charges. and he was going to be going down to one building, where sort of the legal proceedings are carried out for the Manhattan District Attorney. Now, last night, we got indication that the feds were going to file charges, and that changes the game. Even though the NYPD, as you saw, they had their chopper transporting him down to Wall Street, the feds have really stepped in, and they're taking the lead on this. This arraignment, the federal judge read him his rights, asked, do you understand what the charges are? She started to read the charges. He waived reading of the entire complaint because it's pretty lengthy. He said, yes, I understand. And then it was pretty quick. It was about a 20-minute arraignment hearing. These are often pretty quickly, but this is a first step. You have to do this. You have to have the suspect come in, appear before a judge, read the charges, and he has to verbally say, yes, I understand what I'm being charged with. So all of that was sort of procedural, and all of that happened just moments ago.
And Anna, let's talk about not just the procedural, but the theory, because I think one of the interesting things that we heard from the defense attorney was that she was saying with the state and the federal charges that the theory of the case were in conflict with one another. You mentioned the terrorism. That is the theory, she says, in the state-based charges. In the federal charges, the theory, according to the defense attorney, is stalking and that they conflict. Explain to our viewers a little bit more about what you're hearing there.
It's a great question. And Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, she's looking at this, and she's looking at 2 or 3 stalking-related charges on the federal side and a murder charge. And then on the district attorney, the Manhattan district attorney side, you're seeing terrorism, and those are different things. So she was asking the judge, well, wait a minute, is this like a concurring investigation? These two theories are divergent. People in the legal community are sort of all kind of gobsmacked, like, wow, they weren't necessarily expecting this. And then other experts I've talked to said, well, you know what? If I was Mangione's attorney, I might want my client to serve time in a federal court instead of a place like Rikers Island, where he would be if he's convicted on the charges that District Attorney Bragg has charged him with. There are so many questions, though. Right now, all we know is January 18th, so just about 3 weeks from now, 3.5 weeks from now, there is a preliminary hearing for him on these federal charges. So far for Bragg's case, we don't have anything. We don't have a time for an arraignment. He hasn't been arraigned on those charges, and we certainly don't have a preliminary hearing. So it does appear that the federal case is taking precedent and will go first.
All right, Anna Schechter, thank you.